a cost center to a value-added mission enabler. Please give them a warm welcome.
Okay, good morning. I'm Tom Temin. I'm the first one that she mentioned, and great to see everybody here. You know, there's a lot of empty seats down here, and if Link Ray was performing, you would give the doorman $50 to sit down here. And so even though we're talking about federal information technology, you know, think about how bored the building must be to listen to what we're going to be talking about today compared to who's usually here. Anyhow, we are going to talk about leadership in IT, and we're going to get, and I promise we're not going to talk too much about cybersecurity or cloud. We're going to talk about real mission-related things that people are doing in federal agencies. And just to kind of set the scene, I want to read a few lines from the 2018 budget proposal from the Trump administration, just to kind of set the scene. Again, whether this happens or not is anybody's guess. But my suspicion is that at that level, what they have requested is probably going to go through. But just briefly, the request is for 4,087 IT investments for a total spending of $95.7 billion next year. That is a record number. There is an increase of about $1.6 billion over last year. Most of that is going to DoD. So you guys are going to face, in aggregate, flat budgets in the coming year. What they also point out is that the largest 100 IT investments account for 57% of federal spending. And a couple other highlights here. Homeland Security, of which FEMA is a little tiny piece somewhere in there, has a total spending of $6.8 billion for next year in IT. Agriculture, John, is $2.9 billion. You know that, but maybe they don't. And EPA, well, $328 million. You're little guys, but you're still in the top, whatever, 50. So the things that are stressed in the budget are the Technology Modernization Fund, whether that happens, you know, that's always a battle between the OMB and Congress, whether there is a fund and how it's administered, but something like that is still on the books, and also a great deal of emphasis on modernization pursuant to improving digital services and all those kinds of things. And that's kind of where we're going to focus today, on the mission-related type of spending, or those initiatives in large federated agencies like agriculture that can happen at headquarters that can enable those components where a lot of the mission area developments take place to, in fact, take place. All right, sound like a good place to start? All right, I'm going to start with Jonathan Albom. He's the CIO of the Agriculture Department. To my far, this is my right hand, correct? Right, your left. Being left-handed can be a problem sometimes. You've got the biggest budget of all in aggregate, and you've got a lot of ideas regarding the purposes of modernization and how that can ultimately serve missions down the line. So maybe go through that for us. Give it a tug.
So, should be on. All right. So I don't think this is on. That's fine. I'll try and speak as loudly as possible so we can. Got it? I'll take that. Grab one of those. All right. There we go. Thanks. It's great to be here. As mentioned to a few people, I have a friend who has a band who's played on this stage, and I've gotten to see him sitting in those seats a couple times. So it's sort of interesting for me to have this perspective. I've been in this place often, so this is a kind of unique experience for me. But to Tom's question about agriculture and modernization, I think it's important to take a step back when you talk about a large federated organization like USDA and just get a sense of all the kinds of things that we do and how the term modernization means different things in different parts of our agencies. You know, USDA does everything from writing nutrition policy to providing support to farmers and ranchers to managing our national forests, fighting forest fires, agricultural research, so on and so forth. And when we talk about modernizing in our different mission areas, it's going to have a different feeling. You know, I recently had a chance to visit with some of our Forest Service IT employees, and these guys have a very challenging job. They travel to tops of mountains in our national forest, sometimes via helicopter, sometimes they have to hike up there. Sometimes they have to carry guns to shoot bears that may approach them while they're doing their work, which is to make sure in our national forests we have radio communication, effective radio communication. And when you think about that as a mission that we have at USDA, it's very different than the mission that we have in Farm Services Agency or our Natural Resource Conservation Service, where we run kind of a retail operation helping farmers and ranchers modernize, apply for programs and run successful farms and whatnot. So to the individuals in the Forest Service, having a strong infrastructure and communications capabilities and having good strategic plans around how we build radio communications is to them, that is modernization, and that's really highly critical because that saves lives and keeps our national forests running safely. And from the Farm Services perspective, having a strong network is important, but really they feel a lot of pressure when the farmer walks up and they need to be effectively served and given good information about what their opportunities are around farm programs or different conservation programs. They need good systems and intuitive processes to help that farmer have the best experience they can in that office. So our modernization work runs the gamut from that infrastructure kind of work that's multiple agencies can leverage to thinking about how we provide better customer service to the people that we directly serve. And one of the first things that our new Secretary Sonny Perdue, stated for USDA is that we're going to be a really very customer-focused organization. And in that office where we have Farm Services Agency or NRCS, we're going to think about ways that we can effectively bring those organizations together and provide comprehensive IT solutions. So I think in the next several years, a lot of our focus is going to be on frontline customer service in our county offices, approximately 3,000 offices all over the country, where we have that retail-ish kind of operation, providing good service, providing comprehensive solutions, unified solutions. So we're not building one solution for NRCS customers, one solution for FSA customers, thinking about the commonalities. But at the same time, having an ongoing focus on strong infrastructure, information security, cloud, all those things that enable those services, whether it's serving farmers and ranchers or protecting people that want to recreate in our national forests.
And just a follow-up question, the FITARA law changed somewhat the relationship between bureau CIOs, which, even though they're not supposed to be bureau CIOs in that title under FITARA, nobody has ceased using that expression in the 3 or 4 years that law has been in effect that I've ever heard. And so has that changed or altered or improved or worsened your ability to kind of effectuate this federated approach?
Yeah, so at USDA we have a CIO council, and we meet routinely with our agency CIOs, and we really approach it from a partnership perspective. I know that FITARA gives the department CIO lots of power on paper, and it's important to have those authorities. But ultimately, at a large organization like USDA, the money sits in our programs and sits with the agencies. And my experience is both as an agency CIO, where I worked at Food and Nutrition Service for many years, and now in this job, I recognize that there is a very important dynamic between the department and the agencies. And we can ask a lot of things at the department of agencies. We could try and tell them, but ultimately the programs are so important that they, with the things they need to do to operate and serve our citizens, they tend to win out. So my experience tells me the best thing to do is figure out the right way that we work together so we can align our interests and we can have very good collaboration. And while we had lots of people with the title of CIO, I think the way we've set it up, there's a recognition that agency CIOs have a very important seat at the table, and they co-lead our major initiatives. And while as the department CIO, I could say, theoretically, do this and do that and do the other thing, on the back end, we need willing participation from our agencies. So we find it much more effective to have our agency CIOs be a vibrant part of our CIO council, co-lead our major initiatives around cloud or network modernization or different topics, and help us drive towards solutions that work in a suite of agencies, not just one or two specific missions.
Okay, and Steve Fine has the enviable job of being the acting CIO, in an agency where Congress, the administration, industry, and the courts are all fighting over the future of what it's going to look like, what it's going to do, the scope of it. But so if it's safe to say that maybe the administration and industry hate the EPA, Congress still loves it. And so it's a cloudy future for how that might end up. But nevertheless, it does have a large and enduring mission that I think will ultimately remain mainly intact. And you are undergoing a lot of changes, a shift to cloud, a shift in culture. Also, you're about halfway through a major modernization of a very old system, the Lotus Notes system, and there's still agencies turning that cocoon into a butterfly. So what's going on with respect to what you're looking forward to for users and the public?
Thanks, Thanks, Tom. Happy to talk about some of those things. Can
we turn them up here?
Try this. Is that better? Yeah, thank you. Happy to talk about some of those things and focus primarily on what we're doing in shared services to support the mission, and also some of the culture, ways we're trying to affect the culture to, again, support the mission. On the shared services side, EPA started 6 years ago to look at things like a common geo-platform, as we call it, for providing for our employees and contractors to be able to set up and deploy very quickly GIS-type services. So this could be something that you need for emergency response, to have people have a common operating picture. Could be something like a scientist needing to look at results from analyses in an affected community. Or it could be where we want to display information to the public about, say, the impact of air quality on communities and on the nation. So starting 6 years ago with very diverse efforts, we now are to the point where we have a common geo-platform that's used by over 5,000 people in the agency. And to give you context, the agency has about 15,000 employees and about 6,000 contractors who've got accounts. So out of 20,000 people, we've got 5,000 people signed up to use the geo platform. And just on the public side, they've deployed more than 700 mapping applications. And we've supported this through common IT infrastructure, so people don't have to deploy their own computers, configure software. We also have an ever-growing set of data sets that are very easily available. FEMA data sets, interior data sets, weather, as well as EPA data sets and from other agencies. So it makes it very easy for someone to literally, in a couple days, go from an idea for an application to something that's on our public website, meeting all of our security requirements. So we've saved significant effort as well as supporting the mission and being able to getting information out much more quickly and effectively. So we're now taking that approach to data analysis and visualization. So we stood up last year, and you're going to hear from Dr. Robin Thottengalten later this morning, who's EPA's chief data scientist. Going to hear from him, and he and his team have helped spearhead setting up this new visualization platform using commercial technology, in this case from ClickSense, where, again, we've deployed a common platform, shared servers, load balanced, security set up in a common way so that people can very easily take complex table-based data and deploy that either internally across the agency or externally for public use. And you end up with dynamic graphics where you can click on charts, dive into the data, and again, very quickly see information in both geospatial context and multivariate perspective. We started this a little over a year ago, and we now have 1,000 users in the agency. Actually, 800 users who've deployed more than 1,000 applications on this. So again, shared services to promote applications within the agency to the benefit of the agency's mission. Another area, we work very closely with state governments and tribal governments. And EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment, and states and tribes are our close partners in doing that. They share great responsibility along with EPA. So a key part of this is how do we share data? And we've worked for a long time on sharing data with states. We have, and tribes, something called, for instance, the Exchange Network, 100 different types of data flows. We move back and forth. And this includes a governance approach for the Exchange Network, tools we provide. We also provide grants to states and tribes so they can develop new capabilities. And this has been very effective with the states. We are now looking to build on that with additional shared services. So, for instance, historically, a lot of our data systems have been built around particular regulations. So we might have one data collection system that collects air pollutants, hazardous air pollutants, another one that collects greenhouse gas data, emissions data. Both may come from the same source. So we are now working closely with state governments, with our staff, to build some common registries for facilities. We've had one for a while, but we're extending its capabilities. And then trying to build a system to demonstrate how we could take 4 different systems that collect data and combine that into one system. So regulated entities, companies would have one place to go. States would have one place to go. We could share data much more effectively. So an example of, again, shared services to support the mission.
It sounds like you're moving toward the idea that I've heard a lot of people say lately. This term has come into vogue, and that is data is the new oil. And so it's disaggregated from applications, but integrated as data to be applied to whatever someone has the imagination to apply it to. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yes, it is. I think, and we've got still more work to do in that direction. Again, Robin Thottengalt is helping to lead the charge in that.
Yes, you want to stay and hear Robin. He's very articulate on this. And I should point out, too, that you mentioned your chief data officer, and that is a title that has really come into a lot of currency. I think it's a good legacy of the prior administration of how many data officers actually exist and are working effectively throughout the federal agencies. And so Adrian Gardner is the CIO of FEMA. You are a component CIO, but a big one. And there's a lot going on right for FEMA and its mission, in particularly modernization. One you mentioned and wanted me to ask about is the flood insurance program, but there's many others, and you might want to talk about what some of the top of your list is.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about modernization, I can't do that without speaking to mission. And so, one of the things that we talked about in the green room was this whole notion of FEMA doesn't execute without its partners, right? We have state, local, territorial, and tribal partners. We also have partners like EPA and USDA and Department of Energy that actually assist and support our efforts when a disaster happens. So really want to reemphasize that some of the modernization activities, the way that we execute our mission, we are reliant on many federal, state, local, territorial, tribal partners in order to make that happen. At the front of all of our minds on a continuous basis when you live and breathe at FEMA is about the first responders and actually the survivors. And so as you modernize, we have to make sure that those modernization efforts actually will work in American Samoa, all the way to the Caribbean, from the Caribbean all the way across the country to American Samoa, Alaska, so very distant locations. So a lot of times in the past, we've...
A lot of temperature gradients in there also.
and time zones. So I think we operate on 5 different time zones, if I'm correct. So it's important that as we architect systems and capabilities, that we keep that distant end in mind. So one of the things that we really have tried to sort of foot stomp is not architecting for 500 C Street, in other words, for headquarters. We need to make sure that we're architecting for that distant end. That may mean that could potentially mean that we would have to actually do something different than we would here in DC. And I would posit that absolutely we're going to have to do that. So one of the things that we've been doing is a lot of outreach to the regions, as well as state and local, territorial, and tribal partners to ensure that they're engaged up front in any modernization activities we have. The other thing, as you talked about, was flood insurance. So FEMA basically manages the nation's flood insurance program. We use different resellers to actually support that. So you have like Aon and USAA to call out some companies, State Farm, so on and so forth. The normal cast of characters actually sell flood insurance. All of that is backed by FEMA. And so one of the things that we've had to do is we have a very old flood insurance program, still on a mainframe. We just modernized it and actually in collaboration with Jonathan's organization, did a lift and shift of that mainframe to the USDA NHTSA. But we're now looking to take that mainframe and modernize it to sort of 2017 or at least 2020 sort of expectations that are going to be forthcoming. Excuse me, for insurance holders. And so one of the things that FEMA has had to also act like is a business. So thinking about the insurance companies, think about the way that you interface with your insurance company today. We would want you to have the same or better experience as you interface with FEMA. And so one of the key things that is important as we look at these modernization activities is also looking across the gambit of, who are the actual customers and who are going to receive those capabilities. We're also looking at our grants management program, and we have a grants management modernization where we're taking basically 9 different programs and collapsing the systems that support that into one. And that's a big, huge endeavor from a perspective of looking across the multiple programs, still providing the same sort of customer interface because you have to deal with the uniqueness of the programs, but still leveraging the data and the infrastructure behind it to make more better and better data-driven decisions. A lot of times we have focused on sort of the very end of I would say the beginning of a disaster activity, which is response and recovery, without now looking at planning and mitigation on the backside. Where did the grant money go to make that community more resilient? How does that now relate to sort of the grant requests that they're making in the middle of disaster? Did they actually adhere to the building requirements that were called for as part of the grants process? So now we're actually being able to sort of bring response and recovery, mitigation, planning, protection all into sort of one view, if you will, to support the overall mission of FEMA and also supporting state and local territory.
So that's really an upgrade or an upshift from simply a transactional system that gets money out or something back to a total data analytical environment that includes the transactions.
Correct. And as you stated, data is the new oil, right? So one of the things that we have 3 modernization activities. We have our financial system modernization, grants, as I mentioned, and flood insurance. The 4th is looking at data. So our enterprise data warehouse, and how do we modernize that to sort of support data analytics and analysis, real-time sort of consumption of data, and really even self-service. We want to be the situation where you could come into FEMA and actually fill out a form and actually push a button and you would get your answer immediately, right? As opposed to going through either talking to a customer service agent or the like. If there's a way to get to self-service, I think that's what's ahead of us.
All right, so we've heard some themes here, and some of the things in common that I'm hearing is, again, the disaggregation of data from applications, the whole idea of modernization so that analytical ability and deployment to customers is smoother. And so that gets to the question of how you go about development, especially when you're trying to modernize these COBOL systems. They just don't go to the cloud because the software stack in the cloud is not compatible with those applications as they exist on your mainframe for a lot of technical reasons we won't get into. But I was wondering, as you look ahead to this new way of thinking, which is customer experience, analytics, flexible applications, data to be applied to whatever it needs to be applied to, regardless of its origin and so forth, what is the new approach you're taking to development, and how can contractors help that may have done it the old way for the last 50 years?
Sure. So first, I wanted to comment on something Adrian said, is that we can't be thinking that when we develop these applications, we modernize these systems, that they work only in the Washington, D.C. area or in our regional offices where there's good connectivity. We have similar missions at times, FEMA and USDA, and even when we don't, we're still working in these locations that are sometimes very low bandwidth and where connectivity is at a premium. So we have to be very thoughtful when we do this modernization effort, that things have to work on the top of a mountain, or they have to work, in someplace in rural America on a farm. And we don't always consider those aspects of our requirements. We think very, kind of meat and potatoes about what this system is supposed to do and how can we do it better with good user experience and good data. But
and it's also
more complicated.
Let me just interrupt a second. Probably some of those big farms have more up-to-date IT than the agriculture department.
Yeah, absolutely. Farmers are very progressive, and they employ GPS technologies that allow for precision agriculture. They have a large investment, the big farms, in GIS and mapping technologies that give them great information about the quality of their soil and how much to plant and where to plant and how much to irrigate and how much to fertilize. So in some cases, there's a real expectation that our technology is compatible with what they're doing, and also that the access is the same as a commercial provider, like John Deere or a tractor manufacturer that offers related technology. So in some cases, we have pressure from our customers to modernize our systems and provide self-service capabilities. And sometimes in that same community, there's a reticence to do things online still. And there's a greater comfort to go in one of those offices that I mentioned earlier. But Tom, I think your question was about how do we go about doing these things. And we found at USDA that the large system efforts that we've had over many years and very waterfallish kind of approach, they did not work out, right? That's not a surprise, and no one's going to be. It's not a headline. I think we've seen that, across government, and we've moved to much smaller, more agile-ish kinds of efforts. Some of our agencies have really embraced Agile. I think we have Chad Sheridan speaking later. He's from the CIO of our risk management agency. They've implemented a version of Agile that they're very proud of, and they've shared with our other agencies how they're doing things. And I'm sure Chad will share, and I've seen it in RMA and elsewhere, that moving to a different kind of approach is very much requires a culture change. And that change in culture is very important to make sure that people understand this approach to modernization is not, let's put all our money down and get something later. It's going to be lots of ongoing engagement. And that's a very important piece for our business customers to understand, because it's not as simple as hand money over to IT and get something out. It's going to cost money, but there's going to be also a cost in people's time. And we need agency program areas to be very focused on IT modernization. They have to be our partners in this effort. They have to be committing not just the financial resources, but human capital resources to participate day to day on these projects to make sure things are going in the right direction. That's still a shift for some of us. So that change in approach, while I think it leads to better results, is an important concept for people to understand if we want to get it done right and get it done in a way where we're speeding capabilities and functionality out to our business customers.
So I think just to respond also to your question, one of the things as a CIO is you have to be able to meet the demand signal coming from the programs. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of development activities. So I don't run a centralized IT environment. So 1/3 of the systems sit in my budget, 2/3 sit in the programs and regions. So you understand the demand signal. So one of the things that I have to do as a sitting CIO is position the organization to meet the demand signal from the program's development activities. Because one of the things that I'm focused on is really modernizing the release process. So as Jonathan is talking about, it is a cultural shift, right? I recognize right now my test and development laboratories, which is the way in which we do sort of release today, using traditional waterfall, is not going to meet the demand signal of an agile process. It is just not going to get there, which means I'm going to have to now retool, rescope, re-engineer, modernize the way that happens. And that's not only a technology issue, that's also a people issue, because folks are used to releasing in a certain way. They're used to working overnight, working the release off hours as best as they can, crossing their fingers, hoping that everything is well tested and ready to go when it goes into production. And that's just not going to cut it. And so one of the things that I'm doing right now, I'm really focused on modernizing my dev test environment in a manner that now brings cloud, brings open standards, open sort of APIs to that whole discussion, right? And so one of the things as a CIO, what I'm focused on right now is orchestration. So I'm allowing the folks to develop above that, but as they come in for release now, I then want to consume and take over the orchestration process, because then in order to get to release, they have to interface. We have to have state, local, territorial, tribal partners online to actually test the application to ensure it's going to work, even when we go into production. We need to make sure that my team is ready to catch it from an operations and maintenance cycle. So as we look at now Agile, and that you're speeding that up right now, when you get to like real-time release, you're going to have a process now that is sort of in tune with the rate and speed at which those development activities are happening. The other thing is looking at real-time authorization. So I'm looking to actually think about, shrinking the ATO process down from 365 days or more than 300 days, down to sort of days or hours, if that is possible, depending on sort of the kind of change that's happening. Because that's the way industry is doing it today. Now, none of that is real today. But that is absolutely something that I'm hard charging on over the next 6 to 9 months.
You have to have a model before you can get there.
Well, you have to have a model, and you have to have intent. So right now, I put the intent out there to both industry as well as sort of my staff and the like, to sort of how are we going to get there? Because as we look at these modernization activities that are going agile through various mechanisms in the program areas, as they come into release now, I want to make that as speedy as their development process. So if they are putting out a release in 30 or 60 or 90 days, I actually want that release process to even beat that, where I'm now can actually take that product, put it into the orchestration layer, put it through all the checks from the perspective of security and everything else, and user acceptance testing out the door. And so that's one of the things that I've really been focused on.
Yeah, so I guess the difficulty is knowing when you've gone too far with orchestration and you can't have human intervention. I mean, you used to compile software to a runtime and see if it worked. Now you're talking about subsuming that into something, a larger superset of automation, correct?
Correct. I think the difference is that, if you look at the way modern release sort of technologies are going, there's a very quick transition from if you know it's not working, you can quickly then revert back to the old, right? The challenge that we have today with traditional sort of mechanisms for release is that's a very difficult and kludgy process. But if we can automate that part where now I can fall back to actually the standard that was working or the configuration that was working, I think that's where I want the automation to occur. I think humans, at least within the FEMA environment, are still going to have to be involved in the release process, because there's so much modernization that has to happen. In other words, I have a lot of legacy. I am modernizing a small, I shouldn't say a small, I'm modernizing a percentage of FEMA.
Especially of the data flows that you described earlier. That involves 50 or more, 51 with DC and state and local entities that are really the data feeders to EPA. So what are you thinking in terms of this agile and orchestrated approach there, or are you?
So let me answer that in two ways. So first, in terms of cooperating with the states and tribes, we work very closely with them in trying to understand what their needs are, what's coming up, so that we can be in sync as we move forward on those shared data systems and the data flows. On Agile, we have jumped all in on Agile. And I'm trying to take a very comprehensive approach to implementing it. So we're training our developers. We've developed a developers guild where developers can talk to each other, and we've got monthly...
Guild, not guilt.
Yes, definitely guild and not guilt. We think they're very happy actually doing this. So they can learn from each other, best practices across the agency. We have incorporate this into our FITARA reviews for acquisitions. So we have a conversation as part of the reviews on, are you using Agile? Is Agile appropriate? We have been bringing tools to support this, DevOps, and we've been seeing some very good results as teams have adopted this in that they've been able to develop capabilities much faster than they were able to with a greater customer satisfaction. To complement that, on the customer satisfaction side, we have also stood up a customer experience program within EPA. And this is primarily, at first, inwardly facing, so looking at EPA users of systems that we develop. And we're looking at what's their satisfaction, what types of roles do we see, what are the journey maps, what are the pain points, and then feeding that back to our development side. But we're starting to see some of the mission parts of the agency picking up those approaches and starting to think about how to apply that to groups outside of EPA and understand how they can deliver services even better outside the agency with that.
I would just note on Agile, I try to not get caught up on the term Agile. We'd like to try and think about more incremental development and moving away from the idea of waterfall, right? Implementing Agile as in a pure form is really hard, right? And we're maybe not ready for that or have the right expertise, but we can do smaller projects and think about bite-sized chunks of things and develop in increments. And I think those are all the right activities, whether it's officially Agile or not. We definitely like to think about small projects and getting away from large, long-term application development efforts. I think if I could summarize that, I'd describe it that way.
Okay, are we taking questions from the floor? Do we have any? Wow, okay. Last chance as I scan. All right, I want to zoom out then a little bit here for a few more minutes, and that is getting to the theme, the touted theme of this, which I think was, IT is a mission enabler. I think we've talked about that to a degree, but I also want to talk about IT leadership. And this really is unusual times we're living through, and without, taking sides or discussing the politics, I think it's an unusual time to be a federal career manager. And so what I'd like to do is ask you all, just to get a sense of, do you feel like you're supported? Do you feel like it's going the way it should with respect to the stated objectives in the administration's budget request for 2018? And maybe a little bit about what it does take to be an IT leader in these shifting times we're in, both technologically and in the approach to the budget.
Yeah, I would say, I don't see it as a shift in general. I think the challenges of this time are similar to the challenges of past times. Now I think they are more front and center. I think everybody across the country is having a conversation about cyber. That was not the case in the past. So I do believe that there is a renewed interest and emphasis on cyber. I mean, the executive order is absolutely, I think, sort of the right way to go about it. I would say that has been sort of forecast and tried to be positioned in the past. So it is something that I think has come now to a place where it is gaining traction. It's interesting to my new administrator coming in did mention cyber in probably his introductory comments to the staff and to the leadership. So I think it is in the top of all of the leadership's mind from a standpoint of across all the departments and agencies. As an IT leader, I think it is incumbent upon us to prepare the next generation. So one of the things that I see is not happening as much is who's going to come behind us? Where are we from a perspective of preparing the next generation of IT leaders, CIOs, and what will they look like? Because I think it's going to be a drastically different skill set than we have today. So, I think we've, a lot of us have grown up either through the program areas or through IT itself, or through the military and come into these positions. But I think now the question is, what kind of critical skill sets are going to be required in the future? So one, I think you're going to have to be able to partner. I think we do too much in email. We don't talk to each other enough. And so I think you're going to really have to have a CIO or an IT leader that can actually get from behind the screen and go and talk to somebody in a manner in which they understand the words that are coming out of their mouth. I think the next thing
That's a refreshing thought.
Yes. I think, and I face that every day. So this whole notion of communication, even to the vendor community, when you're communicating with us, say it plainly. Say it simply. Because the only way I'm going to be able to communicate to a procurement official or another decision maker is to actually understand the words that you actually espoused, comprehend those, and then actually say those back to sort of those parties in a manner that they understand the value of the investment. The other thing is we're going to have to do better with budget. We haven't done that in the past. So one of the things that I've been investing in is the Technology Business Management Framework, TBM. If you haven't seen it, please take a look at it. If you're in the federal sector, there is a community of interest that's been established by OMB, but this has been largely already been adopted and accepted by a lot of the upstarts, whether it be in Silicon Valley. A lot of industry sectors from looking at insurance to financial sectors have adopted this this capability. And what it is it's actually a framework that has been agreed upon by the CIO and CFO community, where now I am talking, when I say a cost category like telecommunications, there's actually a definition that a CFO understands and actually has bought into. And in addition to that, what they do is they're actually allowing now they have metrics around different capabilities. So if I have deployed cloud email in this financial broker, I can now do a comparison to another broker that has also deployed the same tool and looked at it from a cost standpoint as well as performance. Now think about how that could play out in government terms. So now FEMA could look at its partners, and we can look at how our telecommunication costs are compared to USDA, whether it be in the middle of a disaster or response to a fire, so on and so forth. If we could do cost comparisons and then go back to industry and say, why are you charging me twice as much as somebody else that has the same op tempo in USDA? So starting to have more conversations around cost and transparency and budget. So I think the only way we're going to be able to survive is actually to have those kind of conversations and come to the table armed with the ability to have that level of dialogue with the CFO community.
Steve, leadership in IT, what does it take these days?
I thought Adrian had an excellent point that today is in many ways similar to what's come before. Maybe the pace is faster, but so I think many of the things that make a great IT leader are still applicable, but you need to keep up with a faster pace. So as Adrian talked about, communications, being able to lead your staff, being able to get teams of people to understand complex problems and develop solutions that meet the business needs. I think all those things that have made great CIOs and great IT leaders in the past still apply, just keeping up with a faster pace.
All right, so some eternal truths. Jonathan?
Yeah, I look at the opportunities that we have around reform and reducing redundancy. And in a large federated agency like USDA, we have a lot of help desks, a lot of teams that do management of email. Even though we have one email solution, we have a lot of teams the agencies that manage it. We have a lot of networks, so on and so forth. And that's grown up very organically over time. And I think we have the opportunity to sit back for a little bit and think strategically about, well, what should it look like? And as we're developing those kinds of plans, I think the real leadership comes in because, again, it's not this top-down, heavy-handed, we're going to have one network and it's going to look like this and you're going to manage it this way. It's a very collaborative conversation with the agencies. That's where the rubber meets the road, and where they have those unique requirements to operate in Guam or to operate on a mountaintop, so on and so forth, so we can understand and appreciate that it's not just what it looks like on paper in Washington, D.C., that there is a reality of a person serving a citizen out somewhere, and this solution has to work for them too. So if we're going to consolidate an approach to network, or have fewer approaches to managing service desk or whatnot, those kinds of reform opportunities are really great chances for USDA to focus its spending on mission and provide services to agency CIOs so they can be focused on delivering mission and data, business systems. But we have to do it in a way that respects the diversity of our agencies, do it in a way that respects the complexity of mission and delivering services in a rural community. But as long as we keep those things in mind and we do it in a collaborative way, I think this time right now is a great chance for us to make some significant changes to the way we operate, and good changes that ultimately benefit not just our office of the CIO or agencies, but really the citizen in the end. And I think in the end, ultimately, that's what it's really about. So I'm very optimistic about our chance right now.
All right, final question. I want to start with an anecdote, and the anecdote concerns my nephew, who joined the software industry almost as an amateur, but ended up at a company, and it's like a roller coaster. All of a sudden, he's on this little train that's taking him higher and higher and higher and higher. He's doing great, earning big dollars, and then the company gets bought by Microsoft. Now he's really in the world of big-time business, big-time software, big-time development, and loves it. And there's, when you're in there and you get a buyout from a company like that, even if you're not an executive, there's a chunk of dough that comes with it. So it's an exciting time. And of course, now he has offers every week from all sorts of startups on both coasts and so forth. And really, the world is this young developer's oyster. You know the story. It's legion. And so contrast that with how it might look when people view the federal government from the outside. Now, we know better. We know how effective a lot of people and a lot of programs in government are, but externally, let's face it, it's not looking all that great right now. So in terms of talent management that you've all mentioned, and the talent that both government and industry that serves government needs in the coming years, in, say, 1 minute, what is the case to someone like my nephew for the agriculture department?
Well, the USDA touches the lives of all Americans. And there is not a person in this room that doesn't have some benefit from the Department of Agriculture. I like to say, if you ate today, thank a farmer, right? And we help 2.5 million farmers routinely implement through farm programs and other means. So if you want to think about having a real impact on people's lives, people that you're never going to meet probably, but people who will benefit from the work that we do, work at a place like USDA. Every child that eats lunch at school, whether it's free, reduced, or they pay the full price, is a USDA customer. USDA subsidizes 19 cents of every meal and provides standards that those schools use, and helps those schools procure food in a way that helps them meet the correct cost and nutrition guidelines. So everybody in some way or another benefits from USDA. If you go to a national forest, you benefit from USDA. We have such a profound impact on people's lives that it's hard to comprehend at times. So I love working at USDA for that reason alone. I know that I'm having on my hardest day, on the worst day, where things don't, the network might not be working right, or the secretary's computer doesn't work right, or whatever it is, that very hard moment, you can always sit back and reflect on the millions of people that benefited from the work that we do, and that's to me, it has a very calming effect, and it's a great reason to work at USDA or any other agency. We all have great missions.
Steve, the case for government.
John expressed things very well. For EPA, it's the air we breathe, the water we drink. There's still a great need to ensure that we have an environment that allows us to be healthy. There are literally tens of thousands of people who still die due to environmental issues each year in the country, and to be able to help ensure that that is done in a way that is balanced, protects human health, in working with states and other groups, is a very rewarding way to give back to society.
All right, final word, Adrian.
Yeah, so everybody comes to FEMA for the mission. At the end of the day, we directly support survivors and first responders. This is not a sit in DC job. My whole team deploys, including myself. So if you come to FEMA, number one, your first thing you're going to have on your badge is a red stripe that says you're a first responder. So one of the things that I say when I speak to young folks is that if you want to really get in and see the action of how IT supports this country and citizens when they are in their greatest need, come join FEMA, because that's what we do every day. So when you see the newscast about a flood event or tornadic event, our folks are behind the scenes providing the IT, the technology infrastructure in order to provide that response or recovery activity. So this is real time, get your hands dirty, IT kind of stuff. So we directly support people when they're in their greatest need. We have collaborations with things like FEMA Corps, where we take high schoolers and actually send them out into the disaster area, where they go door to door to support survivors, whether it be through the registration process for housing, so on and so forth. So all of that technology and IT is what supports those activities.
All right, a lot of passion up here. Adrian Gardner, Steve Fine, Jonathan Album, thanks so much. Round of applause for the panel.
Thank you, gentlemen.